Hello, fellow computer viewing individuals, and thank you for listening to my talk here at the World Happiness Summit. I wish we could all be together and seeing each other in person, but I think this will be a pretty fun presentation. I hope you enjoy it. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. I just wanted to say hello first. Let's see, so screen share. Okay. So my presentation is on interbeing, as titled Big Bang Joy, Discovering Happiness Through Interbeing. So interbeing is a term coined by Thich Nhat Hanh. It's a notion of identity that comes from Buddhism. We're going to talk about how that connects to our experience of joy. My name is Thomas Fryman. I come from Columbia University. I'm an advanced doctoral student in Dr. Lisa Miller's lab. So interbeing, in short, is sort of this notion of oneness meets uniqueness. These are two interestingly different things to hold, but merging these two things together, sort of the nature of the universe, that's what interbeing is. So the formal definition describing existence as a connected natural process, which simultaneously becomes the experience of each individual. Interbeing. So we can see this in this little graphic. We have a picture of the oneness 13.8 billion years ago. That was you. And you now, as that oneness, are this multiplicity of uniqueness. So holding those two things at once is interbeing. How does this relate to joy? We will explore further. So first, in Thich Nhat Hanh's words, he says, to describe interbeing, there's no separation between self and other, and everything is interconnected. Once you're aware of that, you are no longer caught in the idea that you're a separate entity. So already we're seeing a little bit of a notion of wellness coming in here. So you're no longer caught in the idea that you're a separate entity. There's some sort of suboptimal state of our joy or happiness or wellness that comes out of the separate ego notion. So in Clark Radcliffe's words, he's another researcher, the distinction between self and other is illusory. This can be called interbeing. It is the continuous stream of this moment before even a single thing arises, which stands at the center of everywhere at once. Each and everything is a particular expression of one seamless whole. So my research at Columbia has been on creating an interbeing scale. That is to measure the sense of personal identity. The sense of, on one hand, feeling that I am somehow fundamentally separate from the universe, from other beings, from nature. And on the other hand, that I am fundamentally connected, yet also unique. So the interbeing scale, the items here, I'm unique and yet one with other beings. The deepest part of my identity exists as all beings. I've had an experience in which I realized that no being is separate from another, although each is unique. Those three items have to do with other people, the part of interbeing that describes oneness with other beings. The next three items have to do with the cosmos. I'm one way the universe experiences itself. I experience myself as a being of the universe, not just as a human being. My life choices are guided by an awareness that the universe exists through each living being. And lastly, we have connecting interbeing to nature. So understanding our identity as an aspect of nature. I often experience my consciousness as woven within nature. I take notice of profound similarities between myself and other forms of nature. And when with animals, I experience myself as part of a greater family of life. So that's the breakdown of interbeing across its different dimensions, nature, cosmos, and other beings. We have this element of connectedness of our identity with each of those through interbeing. Albert Einstein has this great quote, which is basically encapsulating interbeing. And it's Albert Einstein, so we got some clout here associated with this quote, so I'll share it. A human is part of the whole called by us universe. A part limited in time and space, he experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to enhance all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. So a bit of what we'll go into in this presentation is elaborating on that task. Why is that something we must do? Why is this a prison for us? How does it translate that being caught in a sense of separate ego has to do with our joy? William James, the founder of psychology, says we can experience union with something much greater than ourselves, and in that union find our greatest peace. So here we begin identifying the 12 currents from interbeing to joy. The first is bolstered belongingness, and I'll have a quote associated with each of these. So the Beatles, they say, "I am he, as you are he, as you are me, and we are all together." So there's a sense that when we identify with this background cosmic process that exists as all of us, that makes us not only kin, not only this connected family of existence, it's even beyond that to a selfhood, that existence is one self, the closest unit of togetherness, the self. So this sense that we are all one self belonging to each other, that gives us a feeling of mattering, of being held when we contact that. The second one, heightened romantic intimacy. When a man loves a woman so that her life is present in his own, the you of her eyes allows him to gaze into a ray of the eternal you. So just looking into another person's eyes to connect to the depth of their existence, right? The eyes is a window to the soul. That's allowed for in a romantic context, a little bit more than most contexts, and it can really heighten that sense of togetherness with a romantic partner. So that's another current of joy, from interbeing to joy. Transcendence of death fear. A wave on the ocean has a beginning and an end, a birth and a death. If a wave only sees its form with its beginning and end, it will be afraid of birth and death. But if the wave sees that it is water, identifies itself with water, then it will be emancipated from birth and death. So as individuals, we die. We are born and we die. But what is the individual on a deeper level is the fluctuation of this universe. And so when you identify with the universal process, that process never dies. It continues to fluctuate. And when you tie together all the elements of that experience into your own identity, you don't have to be afraid of death anymore on the individual level than the death of this moment to become the next moment. So I am constantly in a process of dying. I am leaving the past moment to become this new moment, to become the next moment. But there's no fundamental loss from myself as a 5-year-old to myself now, in the same way that there's no fundamental loss as I transition past my own death. Other forms of consciousness will continue to fluctuate and emanate from this universal process, which we can tie our identity to. So point number 4, augmented life purpose. Human life is not authentic unless it is lived in terms of self-transcendence. Viktor Frankl. So when we get stuck in this constricted notion of self, we're thinking about, what do I need? What do I want? How, and that creates lots of problems, right? It's like, I don't have enough of this. I don't have enough of that. When we open up to all selves as part of an ultimate identity, we can open up our sense of givingness, our sense of love to all those selves when we really experientially let that in. That can augment our life purpose. For me, that's been through animal ethics and opening up to the suffering of animals in the animal industry, the factory farming industry. So just watching a lot of materials on that and feeling like, oh my gosh, if these are other instances of my ultimate identity, that is really, really purpose instilling, really motivating to reduce that suffering. Just in the same way as if I knew that tomorrow I was going to be, put on death row, or if I was going to be, brutally beat up, I would do a lot to prevent that from happening tomorrow. Um, that would be a future instance of my identity. I can do the same for these instances of my identity that are happening as animals. And humans of all sorts, who are suffering. It's just that I particularly been struck by animals. The thing about interbeing is that opens up to suffering wherever it happens is fundamentally equivalently part of our own identity, which is purpose augmenting. So awe-filled expansiveness. This life you are living of yours is not merely a piece of the entire existence, but is in a certain sense the whole. Thus you can throw yourself flat on the ground, stretched out upon Mother Earth with a certain conviction that you are one with her and she with you. So when we recognize, oh my gosh, this whole cosmic process that is massive, expansive, that thing is becoming me, that is in me, it is me, I am it, it is me, and it is you, and it is this whole thing. Um, there is an immense amount of power, an immense amount of awe that is instilled by really tapping into that in an experiential way, which can happen out in nature, under the cosmos. You could think of maybe looking up at the stars at some point and really feeling that, it's a sense we're kind of isolated from when we live in our offices and our kind of small apartment homes. I was in New York for 5 years, so I know all about that. Point number 6, grounding framework. There are truths about the mind that we are better off knowing. What we need to become happier and to make the world a better place is not more pious illusions, but a clearer understanding of the way things are. So when we have these really expansive experiences of awe, let's say through a psychedelic, through cosmic gazing of the stars at night, through a spontaneous religious experience, etc., it's helpful to bring those back down to the ground by knowing the truth and the kind of sort of rational elements associated with it. And interbeing can be one way to ground those experiences into a framework. Related to that is communication. So a spirituality communication tool, Sam Harris also on this, leaving aside the metaphysics, mythology, and sectarian dogma, what contemplatives throughout history have discovered is that there is an alternative to being continuously spellbound by the conversation we're having with ourselves. And glimpsing this alternative dispels the conventional illusion of the self. So there's a lot of different spirituality cultures and traditions that talk about this same essence. Interbeing can be another tool to communicate this fundamental way of describing our identity. And in turn can help us understand sometimes very ambiguous or difficult to interpret texts from religion, comprehension of religion. So as Jesus said, I am in my Father, and you and me, and I and you. I was like, what? If you're thinking of that in a literal way, it's a little hard to understand. But if we think of the Father, what is the Father? Is something who bears out a child, right? Parents, is a good metaphor they had to work with back in that time. Something from which you emerge. The heavenly Father, the universal Father, the background context, the laws of nature, those all synonymously are this total process from which we emerge. It is us. It is in us, and I in it, and we are in it. So when we think of it from that point of view, that sort of language can make a lot more sense. Chillness instiller. So from the movie I Heart Huckabees, when you get the blanket thing, interbeing, you can relax because everything you could ever want or be, you already have and are. So when we identify with this single process and say, that's my ultimate identity. My ultimate identity is the process of nature. Well, that is everything. So everything you want to be, everything that you hope for that's already out there, you already are it. You're just not aware in your individual form, bound by your individual memory. Number 10, enhanced social cooperation. Interbeing is an understanding that we are relationship, that my very existence depends or draws from or includes your existence. So my well-being is intimately connected to your well-being, or to the well-being of the river, the forest, people across the world, and so forth. So when we identify with all things as ourselves, there's a lot of motivation to cooperate, goodwill. It's a sort of natural immersion from that. Life compass. As Alan Watts says, the real you is not a puppet which life pushes around. The real deep down you is the whole universe. That can guide you towards decisions that will enhance your life. To know that the real deep down you is this process, is this totality. You can sort of live your life and think, okay, like how would I live if I was truly aware that my ultimate identity is expressed as all beings equivalently to myself? It's sort of the golden rule, like treat others as you would treat yourself, but really like working that into your identity. And when that's worked into your identity, it can serve as a compass in terms of making decisions that will better life. Karma booster. Interbeing means I'm not really separate from you. And that means that in the story of well-being, whatever I do to the world will come back to me. So yeah, we all know about karma. And you know, at even a very practical level, whether we're thinking of karma across lives, you know, at a very individual level, or the karma of what we do, what we put out there. If we make somebody smile, suddenly our consciousness is filled with smiles. That feeds right back into us. So what we put out into the world becomes the contents of what we experience from the world and feeds back into our own experience. And when we have an additional incentive to put out goodness into the world through identifying with the world, that can be a great karma booster. So here are just some images to sort of visually, emotionally encapsulate some of those points.